Welcome to an Ask GMBN Tech. Of course, this is the first one of 2019, so happy New Year to all you mountain bike tech lovers out there. This is our weekly Q&A show. You get to ask the questions and hopefully we give you the answers that you need. If you want to ask any questions, get them in those comments below. Use that hashtag AskGMBNTech, or you can find them into the email address right on the screen there. Kicking off this year, the first one of the year is from Jack Beams. What would you say the minimum clearance should be for either side of a tyre on the fork or rear end of a bike? To be honest, I would say probably 5mm is about as close as I would like to get with the biggest tyre I'd like to use. Obviously this is going to vary depending on your frame. If your frame's an older frame, you're going to have more limited clearance and you're going to be forced to use a slightly slimmer tyre, which isn't ideal. Now you've got to bear in mind there's a few different reasons why you need this clearance. So the obvious one is mud clearance. If you live in Europe or the UK or anywhere where you're likely to be riding in mud, depending on the type of mud, if you get the sloppy stuff, you don't need much clearance, but we get the big, thick, claggy, horrible stuff. So you need as much clearance as you can get. Otherwise, you're going to be picking out handfuls of mud out your bike before you can get the wheels to rotate. Never a nice situation. The next one, of course, is if you buckle your wheel when you're riding and your wheel can rub on the frame. So it's going to take paint off the frame. Not an ideal situation. You need to allow for enough room for error there. And then finally, and actually I think probably most importantly, is allowing for frame and wheel flex. Now, your frame and your wheel will flex more than you probably realise. Now, I've had this on several frames in the past where my rear tyre is actually buzzing on parts of the frame when I've been running a really big tyre. It doesn't happen all the time, of course, it depends on where you ride, but those sort of tight little turns that you really push the bike into, they can put a strain and a stress through the bike that you probably don't even really notice it's doing. But you can have a look at the little telltale signs of paint just missing on the inside of the chainstay yoke area there. So you just want to make sure you've got enough room for that sort of margin of error, and then hopefully you'll be alright. But yeah, 5mm is what I would suggest. Alright, next up's a transmission related one from Ben North. Doddy & Co. I'm currently running a 1x10 drivetrain for XCO. So that is basically the cross-country Olympic level style riding. 34 tooth up front with 1134 on the rear. I always see pro XC guys like Nino Schurter running huge front chainrings to make use of the massive Eagle cassette. Shouldn't there be a better and lighter way? I wouldn't say it's to make use of that 50 tooth, because I think the 50 tooth enables him to use an even bigger front sprocket. So you say you're running a 34, Nino tends to run around a 38 tooth. Let's not forget that Nino is quite a lot stronger and fitter and more aggressive in the way that he rides. So he chooses to use a big chainring like that 38 because A, it also offers him, with that 50 tooth on the back, a low enough gear that he can get out of jail basically. He can get up any climb with that at any point in the race that he needs to, but it also gives him a much bigger gear than many of his competitors use. And really, he's one of the only riders that can really do some damage with that gear. Well known for putting people through the shirt locker there, where he puts a power down on 3 or 4 laps ago, whenever he chooses, to be honest. Doesn't even look over his shoulder. Goes. You know what he's like. I don't really think there's many lighter ways of doing it, because to get a similar gear range, straight up you're going to need to do a double chainring setup up front, and that means having a cable on there, it means having a front derailleur, having a front shifter. It's all additional stuff. I actually think it's the most efficient way really for cross country. That is of course at the top end, where it's the XX1 Eagle, the very expensive high-end stuff. As soon as you get down to the cheaper level stuff, the cassette becomes very heavy, and you're right, it does add excess weight doing it this way. So in which case you could go lighter with a 2x setup, but that's all about the 1x for the big boys, especially if you've got the power like Nino to run a 38 tooth chainring. Alright, now it's up to Eric Thatcher. I'm going to buy a new bike this spring, and I want to go from a 29er hardtail to a full suspension bike. I'm thinking about going to 27.5 inch wheel bike because the trails I ride are pretty tight and twisty. Should I go for it, or should I stay with a 29er with full suspension? How long's a bit of string, mate? I really don't know what to suggest, to be honest. So you can be partially right in that a 27.5 inch wheel full suspension bike will certainly feel lively and agile around that twisty stuff, and that's great if that's what you're looking for. But is there any problem with your current wheel size on that terrain? If there's not, then maybe you should stick with the wheel size that you know. Now, a lot of people compare the two wheel sizes and they look at what they can roll over. All right, so arguably a 29 inch wheel can go a little bit faster when it's rougher. It's a little bit slower when it's tight and twisty. But also bear in mind the 27.5-inch wheel will accelerate quicker and decelerate quicker. So something I've noticed on a 29-inch wheel, and what I actually think people mistake for them being quicker than 27.5, is they're slower to slow down. So you feel like you're keeping speed more. And the reason for that, at least my theory, is when you brake on a 27.5-inch wheel bike, your bottom bracket is higher. So you put more bias to digging that front wheel into the ground for traction and therefore slowing down. When you brake at high speed or on chattery terrain on a 29-inch wheel bike, you're so low in relation to the axle that you actually end up pushing the bike forwards more than you do down. And therefore you feel like you're going faster more of the time. And I think that's why a lot of the enduro racers love running the 29s, because they do speed adjustment rather than braking. So the whole time they're just galloping along really. I don't really notice the actual physical speed between the two. What I do notice is the position on the bike. And that is everything to me. It's all about how the bike feels, not really about what the bike is doing underneath me. I have to feel right on the bike. Now, since I've been riding almost exclusively 29ers, every time I go back to 27.5, I find them a little bit unnerving, to be honest. I think I feel too perched, too high on the bike. This does make them easier to flick around, throw around, all that sort of stuff. But actually, I really like the position on the 29. I've not really given you any sort of answer here. So if I was you and I liked the 29er on the typical terrain, I'd be probably in mind to stay with that. But definitely try two similar bikes, one with the bigger wheels, one with the little wheels. Either way, you know, there's lots of options out there, and you might find that you do prefer the smaller wheels because they're fun, but the big wheels are also fun in a different way. Best advice is really to go and try some. Go to a demo, and that's really good because you can change your mind instantly about stuff. All right, next up's from Rock Crumpster. Doddy, I've got lithium grease and I don't know if I can even use it. Where can I use it? Yeah, of course you can use it. Lithium grease is great. It's really good value. It's slightly thinner than a lot of other greases. You tend to use this stuff on working components, things like ball bearings, so headsets, bottom brackets, and that is great. But don't be tempted to use it in places like suspension forks because they're not very good for the bushes and the working surfaces and the seals and things like that. Now, there's a lot of type of greases out there on the market, and they do have different sort of purposes. Now, you can get some all-purpose greases that suit a lot of things, but even then, things like suspension do require a slightly dedicated grease. If you want a complete breakdown on all greases, lubricants, thread locks, assembly compounds and stuff, I made a video exactly on that. I'm going to put a link to it in the description below this, and it will tell you, I think, pretty much everything you need to know about all the types of greases, where you can use them, and more importantly, where you should not be using them. Good information, I think. Check that one out. All right, next up is from Tipfy CG9. When I'm racing downhill, can I go tubeless without the sealant for the runs to save less rotational weight? I know I can't avoid punctures, but it's the same with inner tubes. It's a bit of a mess when I change tyres with a sealant. No, you can't really do that. So you can set up a tubeless tyre with no sealant in it and it will inflate. But part of the beauty of the sealant in the system is if you get any sort of microscopic holes as you're riding, it does seal those. And also, more importantly, when you burp a tyre, which is very likely when you're racing downhill because you're thinking about the clock, you're not thinking about riding conservatively on the bike. When you burp a tyre with sealant in it, it seals much faster again and you don't lose too much air pressure. You burp a tyre with nothing in there, there's a good chance you can pull it straight off the rim. So skip that one out completely. And really, are you going to notice much difference in rotational weight on a downhill bike? I don't think so. I'm sure you could notice back to back if you did tests, but downhill bikes weighing 40 pounds, you're not going to notice a bit of tyre sealant swish, like slopping around inside the tyre. It doesn't really make that much difference. Admittedly, on a cross-country bike, very lightweight bike where anything makes a difference on them, you would notice. But even those guys run tubeless with sealant in. Keep sealant in, does the job, or go to inner tubes. Your choice. Okay, next from Fex Brew. Is it possible to do a fork lower leg service without removing the fork from the frame? Yeah, 100%. I pretty much did that in the winterizing your bike video where I took the lower legs off, replaced the oil, I also greased the seals up and stuff on those. When you do this, make sure at the least you take the brake pads out, or preferably take the whole brake caliper off and let it dangle somewhere safe where it's not going to get any oil contamination. And make sure you have a drip tray, an old dinner tray, anything you can underneath to catch that oil, otherwise it can go all over your floor and it's horrible stuff to clean up, to be honest. Obviously make sure you dispose of the oil correctly too, but nice and simple. And I'm going to throw a link to that winterizing your bike video in the description below this video so you can have a look at that. Super simple process, and yeah, you don't need to remove your fork from your bike. Okay, over to Tom Cooker now. Are master links weaker than regular links? If I joined my chain back to back every time it won, I would be running 4 of them. Do you know what? I don't actually know. I've ended up running a couple before, and I can't see how they would be any weaker than a regular chain when it just comes to chain forces. But because of the fact the way they join rather than the pin pushing through and staying in place more like a rivet, I guess they could potentially be weaker. That is definitely something I need to do a test on. But more to the point, why are you ending up with 4 in there anyway? If you need to split your chain, maybe to clean it or something like that, why not just split that master link that's already on there and replace the master link unless it's a multi-use one. I do recommend using the single-use ones because I feel that they're safer and stronger. But yeah, why not do that? Just a thought. Over to DD410, sounds like a Star Wars character there. Help! My brake pistons are not retracting and one of the pads is rubbing on the disc. I tried removing the wheel and brake pads and pushing the pistons back in. After that, put everything back and pump the brake lever, they don't retract. Brake model SRAM code RSC. Simple, sounds to me that you have sticky pistons. Of course, it could be a bleeding issue, so it is worth doing a full system bleed on there just to see. When you bleed the system, take note of the colour of the fluid coming out. If it's really like dark black and gritty, that you'll know that that is one of your issues. But if you've got a sticky piston, then you're going to need to strip your brakes down. Obviously remove the pads, keep them somewhere safe where they can't get covered in oil. You're going to need to remove those pistons, clean them, the inside and the actual unit itself. And then you're going to need to use some dedicated piston grease. So SRAM make one, there's various other ones on the market. It's basically a dot friendly grease, so the grease is not going to break down with the dot fluid in there. It helps the piston slide in and out, like retract properly, and then you'll need to do a full system rebleed. I'm not sure I've actually done this as a video, so this is actually a good idea. So I'm going to do a piston retract, rebleed, clean type video soon, I think. If you can wait, watch that and I'll show you how to do it. If not, just get involved. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's a fairly simple process. There's just a lot of steps to it. And if you're happy bleeding brakes, then it's just the next step from that. But just make sure you get the correct grease, a dot-friendly grease, like this one on the screen. All right, now to Sean P. If a rim was bent but trued, how long before you need to replace the rim with a new one? Can you get away with riding the same way on a once bent rim, or not that rough and recommend getting a new one? It totally depends on how you ride, to be honest. Despite being quite big and heavy, I'm actually fairly light on the bike, and I've ridden rims with really messed up spoke tension and stuff for quite a while. It's entirely up to you, really. If you ride like Blake and you sort of go through wheels like you do breakfasts, then well, you're answering your own question there. As soon as the wheel collapses, sort it out. I don't think there's any rush to do it. Just keep an eye on your spokes, make sure no nipples are ridiculously loose, and if they are, just keep them nipped up when you see fit. But keep an eye on the rim for any actual structural damage. Keep an eye out for cracks, any creases that look like they could lead to the rim splitting, things like that. Use your common sense, really. If it ends up being that badly buckled, you're never going to be able to return it to a completely true wheel. And then it is time for a new rim. And pretty much every time you're going to need a new set of spokes to go with that as well. It's not a problem, it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's well worth doing because you get effectively a brand new wheel again. And whilst you're at it, do a hub service too, just to make sure all your internals are working and nice. But really, it's kind of using your common sense. There's no right and wrong with this. It's pretty much up to you with how you ride. Okay, so Griffin Taylor wants to know, the Kashima coating on Fox shocks, is it a functional piece or just marketing? If it's functional, do you notice a difference between a shock with it and a shock without it? No, it's 100% functional, but it's a marginal thing. So let's just say a Fox 36 or 34 with the performance, so that's the black coating, and then there's the same equivalent with Kashima. Now they'll feel out of the box, they'll obviously need to bed in a bit, but they'll both feel very, very good, and they'll continue feeling that. After service, they'll both feel very, very similar. The difference is the longevity of it. So the black ones, the regular stanchion tubes that is, They'll basically need more servicing and more TLC to continue feeling that good, whereas the Kashima coated ones work a lot longer. They feel a lot better for a lot longer. And arguably, if you were someone like a Greg Minar and you're really tuned into the mechanics of a bike, you would be able to feel the difference between them. But for most normal people, myself included, they basically feel the same. But essentially what it is you're paying for a high quality coating that feels better for a lot longer. And there we go, that's our weekly Ask GMBN Tech rounded up. If you've got any questions or you want to know anything, let us know in those comments below. And don't forget, you can email us at hellotech@gmbn.com. For a couple more videos, tech related of course, click down here for confusing tech terms. There's a lot of confusing names, but actually they're all fairly simple if you just deconstruct them a bit. And click down here if you want to see me do a bit of trailside setup on my own bike. We always talk about doing stuff in the workshop to get it set up, but nothing beats getting it out there and actually making those fine tweaks on the trail. As always, give us a huge thumbs up if you love GMBN Tech, and let us know what you want to see in the future as well in those comments. And don't forget to subscribe.